My name is Julia Carter. I'm 34 years old, a freelance editor living in a small town near Seattle. If anyone asked me, my life could be described as stable. I have a lovely house, a successful husband, and a flexible work schedule that allows me to work right at my sunlit kitchen table. But in my heart, the word stable always carried a slightly different meaning. It felt more like stagnation. Michael and I have been married for almost 10 years. He's a good lawyer, always busy with big and small cases. His work requires constant dedication, and I don't blame him for that. In fact, I'm proud of him. But, as people often say, the biggest distance in a marriage isn't space, but indifference. Our house is located in a quiet neighborhood with rows of maple trees stretching along the streets, especially beautiful in the fall when the leaves turn a brilliant gold. The living room has a classic fireplace, walls hung with abstract paintings that Michael likes, and a pale green armchair where I usually sit and read. But no matter how beautiful the house is, sometimes it feels uncomfortably empty. Every morning, Michael wakes up earlier than me. He prepares a cup of coffee, then quietly leaves the house before I have a chance to wish him a good day. I wake up in the house already empty of him, make myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and open my laptop to check my work list. The editing work allows me to live the life many people dream of, not having to go to the office, no long meetings. But the truth is, I no longer find joy in this work. Every lunchtime, I eat alone, usually a simple salad or sandwich, while listening to podcasts about how to find life motivation. I don't remember the last time I laughed out loud, or how long it's been since Michael unexpectedly hugged me from behind. He's always polite, thoughtful, but I can't remember the last time we actually talked, beyond questions like, "What do you want to eat today?" or "Did I leave my key somewhere?" I can't blame Michael. He's a good husband. But every time I look at the empty chair opposite me at the dining table, I feel a wave of sadness wash over me. I once dreamed of becoming a writer, writing stories that people couldn't put down. But I gave up that dream long ago, when I realized that short articles and technical manuscripts were the easiest way to make a living. My friends are far away, busy with their own lives. We only connect through short messages on social media, or sometimes a hurried phone call. I once thought that marriage would be the answer to loneliness, but sometimes marriage itself is the cage that locks up the desires I've never voiced. Once, I tried to open up to Michael. "Do you think we should go on vacation? Or do something different, like, go hiking, maybe?" Michael looked up from his laptop, giving a tired smile. "That's a good idea, honey. But let's wait until this case is over." That case lasted 3 months, and then there was another one. And our hiking trip remained forever only in my imagination. In the evening, I sit on the sofa, curled up in my favorite wool blanket, watching a romantic movie that Michael never has time to watch with me. When the screen shows the two main characters running to embrace each other in the rain, I suddenly think, why does life never happen like in the movies? The days passed like that. A calm, peaceful life, but lacking the sparks I craved. And in that peace, I began to feel myself gradually losing a part of my true self, the part that loved writing, loved exploring, loved new things. I wanted to find that part again, but didn't know where to start. Then one day, I met Olivia. I met Olivia on a cold morning at the end of February. It was still drizzling, and the biting wind slipped through the gaps in my coat, making me shiver as I entered my usual small cafe near my house. This was where I often sat to work, escaping the cold silence in my own home. The cafe, with its rustic wooden tables and warm yellow lighting, always offered a sense of peace. I chose a table near the window, placed my laptop on the table, and ordered a hot latte. Rain pattered against the window pane, drawing aimless, squiggly lines. I quietly sighed, opened my email, and tried to focus on my editing work. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" A voice sounded from behind me. I looked up and saw Olivia, a woman around my age, with short, lightly curled brown hair and a stylish black leather jacket. She didn't look like anyone who usually came to this cafe. A hint of confidence, a touch of wildness, and a curious look were evident on her face. Oh, of course, I replied, trying to hide my surprise. This table is free. Olivia set her coffee down, smiling. I'm Olivia. I just moved here from San Francisco. Julia, I replied, a little hesitant. Are you liking it here so far? It's all right, Olivia shrugged. But a bit quiet for me. I prefer more lively places, but I have to admit, the coffee here is good. I chuckled lightly, feeling a little awkward. It had been a long time since I had struck up a conversation with someone new. But Olivia didn't seem like the type to keep her distance. She set down her cup, leaned towards me, her eyes bright. What do you do? Olivia asked, curiously. I'm a freelance editor, I replied. Mostly editing books and articles. And you? I'm a freelance artist, she said, with a self-satisfied smile. I paint, design, and sometimes even do photography. I make a living doing what I love. I couldn't help but look at her a little longer. Olivia exuded a freedom that I had never had. She talked about her work as an adventure, not a burden. Every story she told was tinged with confidence and passion, things that I had long lost. Where did you live before? I asked. San Francisco, the city of crazy dreams, Olivia replied, her voice tinged with humor. But I got tired of it. I decided to move here, where things are slower, so I could find new inspiration. New inspiration? I repeated, feeling a little envious. You seem very free. I am, she chuckled, her eyes sparkling with mischief. You know, I never want to be tied down by anything. Not a job, not a relationship, not even the expectations of others. Life is for exploring, for being true to yourself. Her words rang like a bell in my mind. Freedom. I had never thought that was what I needed, but suddenly, it became the only thing I craved. I looked at Olivia, feeling both admiration and a sense of distance. I don't think I could live like you, I confessed. I'm used to stability. Stability doesn't mean happiness, Julia, Olivia said, tilting her head and looking at me. Are you really happy with your life? Her question left me speechless. I knew the answer, but I didn't dare say it. We started meeting more often after that morning. Olivia was the kind of person I couldn't ignore, she seemed to have a natural magnetism that drew me in. She told me about her travels through Europe, the art exhibitions she organized, and the drunken nights in small bars in San Francisco. Each of Olivia's stories was a piece of a life I had never dared to imagine. Meanwhile, I told her about my boring editing work, the silent dinners next to Michael, and the feeling that I was gradually disappearing within my own marriage. You have to find something for yourself, Julia, Olivia said once when we were sitting on a park bench. Something that makes you feel alive again. Like what? I asked, feeling confused. Horseback riding, Olivia replied without hesitation. Have you ever tried it? No, I shook my head, laughing. I've never even been near a horse. Then it's time, she said, her eyes lighting up. I know a place nearby. A beautiful farm. We'll go this weekend. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to say that I didn't have time, or that I wasn't sure I would like it. But looking into Olivia's enthusiastic eyes, I realized that I couldn't. Okay, I said, and for the first time in months, I felt like a breath of fresh air had blown through my life. The first time I set foot on Willow Ridge Farm, everything opened up like a completely different world. It was a clear Saturday morning, and the green hills stretched out before me. White wooden fences surrounded the vast land, where horses leisurely strolled or galloped in the bright sunlight. The smell of hay mixed with the passing breeze made the air both pleasant and brought an unusual sense of freedom. Olivia pulled me out of the car, her eyes shining. This is where I always go whenever I want to get rid of all the stress, she said, waving her hand towards the horses. You're going to love it. I wasn't so sure about that. Initially, the thought of being near a horse, big, powerful, and seemingly unpredictable, made me feel hesitant. But when I was introduced to Midnight, a jet-black horse with bright eyes and a gentle temperament, the fear inside me gradually dissipated. I gently touched its smooth coat, and Midnight lightly tossed its head, as if to say hello. "Don't worry, Midnight is very gentle," Olivia said, standing next to me. "As long as you're relaxed, he'll be relaxed." It took me a while to get used to it, but as soon as I sat in the saddle for the first time, I realized this was something different. The feeling of sitting on the back of a powerful animal, feeling its rhythmic steps, made me feel like I was connected to a more primal, more natural world. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that feeling. Every time I came home after riding, I felt my body full of energy, my mind lighter and more at peace. It was a noticeable change that even Michael noticed. "You seem different," he said one evening when we were having dinner together. Michael rarely noticed small changes, but this time, his eyes were full of curiosity. "Different how?" I asked, trying to keep my expression natural. "I don't know," he shrugged, smiling slightly. "Maybe happier? You don't look as stressed as before." I just smiled, without explaining further. How could I describe the feeling of liberation I found at the farm? It wasn't something I was intentionally hiding, but I also wasn't sure Michael would understand. Every morning when I woke up, I felt like I had an extra reason to look forward to the day. I usually spent a few hours working, editing manuscripts, before driving to the farm. Olivia had become an indispensable companion on this journey. She showed me how to understand the language of the horses, how to ride and work with them, and how to find joy in every moment. One day, Olivia said to me, "Do you realize, Julia? You're not the same woman I met at the cafe anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're more vibrant. Your eyes are brighter. You found yourself, at least in some way." I didn't know how to respond. But deep down, I knew she was right. I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost, the courageous part, the part that loved exploring, the part that wasn't afraid to try new things. But with Michael, our relationship began to have subtle changes that I hadn't foreseen. I became less concerned about the times he was away from home. If before I would have sadly sat on the sofa alone, now I spent time at the farm or reading books about horseback riding when he worked late. One evening, I said to Michael, "I think I'll go to the farm this weekend. I want to take a longer lesson." "The farm?" He was surprised. "I didn't know you liked horseback riding that much." "Yeah, Olivia introduced me to it. It's a very beautiful place, and I think I need this," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Michael was silent for a long moment. "Okay, as long as you're happy." I sensed a distance in his words. It wasn't opposition, but it wasn't understanding either. He was still there, still the husband I loved, but we were no longer walking on the same path. Gradually, I began to keep my new joys to myself. I didn't tell Michael about Midnight or about the moments of freedom in nature. I realized that I had found a part of happiness that I didn't want to share, because I was afraid that, if I shared it, it would lose the sacredness it held. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel guilty. I loved Michael, but why was I finding joy in a place where he wasn't present? I began to wonder if we were losing each other. Were these changes, even if positive, taking me away from him? I don't remember the last time I felt like this, light, free, and alive with every breath. The afternoons at Willow Ridge Farm were like a kind of magic, pulling me away from all pressure and constraint. There, among the green hills, with the sound of horses neighing in the wind, I was no longer Julia Carter, the wife living in the quiet but empty house, but a completely different person. Every time I entered the stable, the smell of hay and Midnight's hoofbeats were like a welcome. The jet-black horse had a way of looking at me with affection, as if understanding that I was searching for something that I myself didn't know. When I stroked its soft fur, the smooth feeling of each hair under my palm calmed my mind. Those hours riding in the fields, the afternoon sun stretching across the horse's back, the wind blowing across my cheeks, I felt like all burdens disappeared. No more pressure from responsibilities, no more of Michael's tired gaze when he came home after a long day. Here, I didn't need to try to please anyone. It was just me, midnight, and the vast sky. But when I returned home, everything seemed to collapse. Michael, with his neatly pressed shirt and documents arranged neatly on the table, seemed unable to understand the person I had become. He asked me about my day, but the question wasn't genuine concern, but more like a habit. "Everything all right?" he asked as I put my bag down on the table. "Everything's fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice light, but inside, I was constantly restless. I wanted to tell him about the feeling of galloping on midnight's back, about how the afternoon sun through the trees made everything magical. But how could I tell him when he didn't even stop long enough to hear what I was actually saying? That evening, when we had dinner, the usual silence enveloped us. The sound of knives and forks touching the plates was the only sound in the kitchen. I couldn't take it anymore. "Do you ever feel like we're living in two different worlds?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Michael looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I paused, searching for words. "Do you see that we don't really talk to each other anymore? No sharing, no understanding. It's like, we just live in the same house." He was silent for a long moment, then put down his knife and fork. "Julia, I don't understand. What are you talking about? I'm still here, I'm still working for our family. You have everything you need, don't you?" "Do I really, Michael?" I retorted, feeling a lump in my throat. "I have everything, but I don't have you. You're here, but you're not really here. So what do you want me to do?" His voice suddenly turned cold. "Quit my job to do something just because you feel bored? I'm trying to build a good life for both of us." That evening ended with a heavy silence. Michael left the table first, leaving me alone with my chaotic thoughts. I used to think that marrying Michael would be the answer to all my dreams. A stable life, a loving husband, a peaceful home. But now, I wondered if that very stability had become the cage that confined me. At the farm, I felt like I was liberated. At home, I felt like I was imprisoned. The next day, I drove to Willow Ridge earlier than usual. Olivia was leaning against the fence, holding a cup of coffee. She saw me from afar and waved. "What's wrong today? You don't look good," she asked as I approached. "Just a bad night," I confessed. "It's about Michael, isn't it?" Olivia guessed correctly. I didn't answer, just nodded. "Julia, you have to ask yourself, what truly makes you happy? Michael? That house? Or is it you, here, with what you're doing?" I was silent. "You can't live your whole life just to please others," Olivia continued. "You deserve to live a real life, Julia. Not the perfect facade you try to maintain for others to see." Olivia's words were like a knife piercing my deepest fears. She was right. I had spent my whole life trying to do everything right, but was right what I really wanted? That afternoon, I rode midnight again through the green hills. Every step of his seemed to erase another layer of burden on my shoulders. I didn't want to think about Michael, about my marriage, or about what awaited me when I returned home. I just wanted to be here, in this moment, where I felt like myself. But deep down, I knew that things couldn't continue like this forever. The changes in me were too obvious, and Michael would soon realize. I just didn't know what to do when that moment came. I didn't know that Michael had begun to suspect anything. For me, each day spent at the farm was a step closer to the freedom I craved, but for him, they were strange puzzle pieces that he couldn't fit together. Michael had never been the jealous type. He always appeared calm, rational, and confident. But it seemed that the change in me had made him feel insecure, something that I didn't realize, or perhaps I deliberately ignored. One evening, when I had just returned from the farm, Michael was already waiting in the living room. He sat in his favorite armchair, the lights off, with only the dim light from the table lamp illuminating his face. I could see his eyes were a little darker than usual, and that made me stop in my tracks. "You're late," he said, his voice deeper than usual. I put my bag down on the table, took off my coat, and tried to keep my voice light. "Yeah, I stayed at the farm a little longer. Today Olivia and I tried galloping through a new trail. It was beautiful." "The farm." Michael repeated the word, as if tasting it in his mouth. "You've been spending quite a lot of time there lately." I looked at him, a little surprised. "Yeah, I think it helps me relax." Michael stood up, walked closer to me, his eyes so focused that they made me a little uneasy. "Julia, I wonder, what are you really looking for? Or rather, what have you found there that you can't find here?" His question was like a blow to my chest. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I didn't show it. "Michael, it's just a hobby. I need a place to escape the pressure, to feel balanced. It's nothing more than that." "Nothing more?" He smirked. "Then why do I feel like you're drifting further away from me? Like you're hiding something?" I froze. I didn't know how to respond. All I wanted was a little space to find myself again, but why was Michael making it seem so suspicious? "You're overthinking it," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I'm not hiding anything." Michael didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me for a long time, as if trying to find the truth through my eyes. But after a moment, he just nodded slightly and walked past me, up the stairs. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the silent house, leaving me standing there, my heart filled with nameless emotions. The next day, I returned to the farm as usual. Olivia was already waiting, leaning against the fence, waving to me. I smiled, feeling relieved to be away from the house and Michael's scrutinizing gaze. Here, there were no questions, no pressure, just me and the free world I had found. "You seem a little tense today," Olivia remarked as I approached. "Just some small things at home," I replied, trying not to reveal too much. "Don't let it bother you," she said, taking my hand in a friendly gesture. "Here, nothing matters except you and the present moment." Olivia's words were like a sedative. I climbed onto Midnight's back, and just a few minutes later, all my worries had vanished. The wind felt cool, the fields stretched out before me, and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves beneath me. This was the only place where I felt truly alive. But while I was lost in my own world, Michael was beginning to piece things together. That evening, he checked my phone, something he had never done before. He didn't find anything suspicious, but the emptiness in our conversations made him feel even more uneasy. Once, he drove past the farm, trying to see inside the white fence, but seeing nothing but green hills and horses peacefully grazing. He stopped the car there for a while, looking through the windshield, his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. Michael wasn't the type to act rashly, but he knew something was changing in Julia, something he couldn't control. Meanwhile, I was still carefree, immersed in my new world. I started trying things I never thought I would dare to do, galloping through steep hills, practicing simple jumping techniques, and even participating in a stable cleaning session with Olivia and others at the farm. I laughed more, was more vibrant, but at the same time, I gradually realized that I no longer belonged to my old life. Every time I returned home, the space felt too small, too confining compared to what I experienced out there. I started avoiding long conversations with Michael. His questions made me feel suffocated, as if he was trying to pull me back into a life I no longer wanted to be a part of. I knew I was drifting away from him, but I didn't know how to stop. One evening, Michael said, "I have some time off next week. I want us to spend some time together. Maybe go somewhere, like you mentioned before." I paused, my hand holding the fork I was about to use to pick up some food. Part of me wanted to agree, but another part hesitated. "I think I have a few appointments at the farm next week." Michael looked at me for a long time. "The farm? It's always the farm." Julia, do you think you're letting it take over your whole life? Michael, it's just a hobby, I replied, trying to stay calm. Is it really? He frowned. Then why do you always put it above everything else, including me? I didn't answer. The silence between us stretched out, heavy as a curtain about to fall to reveal a truth I wasn't ready to face. Michael wasn't one to show his emotions, but that evening, he could barely maintain his usual composure. We sat facing each other in the living room, the room lit only by the dim yellow light. On the table, his coffee had gone cold, and I couldn't even bring myself to touch my tea. I know, Michael said, his voice so low that I had to lean forward to hear him clearly. No, what? I asked, my heart in turmoil, but trying to keep my voice calm. Michael gave a faint smile, not the smile he used to give me when we were first married, but a bitter one. Julia, did you think I wouldn't notice anything? Did you think I was so busy that I wouldn't notice you've changed completely? I was speechless. My heart was pounding, but I still tried to maintain a calm exterior. What are you talking about? Michael sighed, his eyes reflecting a weariness I had never seen before. Did you think I wouldn't notice? From the late evenings you've been coming home, to the way you're no longer really here even when you're sitting right in front of me? Did you think I wouldn't see the signs? I opened my mouth to say something, but Michael raised his hand to stop me. Let me tell you what I've done, Julia. At first, I thought I was imagining things, Michael began, his voice even but filled with suppressed anger. I thought maybe you just needed some time to yourself, and that the farm was where you found joy. But then, it didn't stop there. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me, as if he was searching for something in my expression. One evening, after you came home late, I decided to check your phone. I didn't find anything, no suspicious messages, no strange calls. But that very emptiness made me even more suspicious. I felt my throat tighten, but I still didn't say anything. Michael continued. Then I drove to the farm one afternoon when you said you'd be there all day. I parked the car some distance from the main gate, just to observe. He paused, looking directly at me. I saw you, Julia. You were laughing, you were writing, you were talking to that woman, Olivia, right? You looked truly happy, a happiness that I haven't seen in you for years. I froze. I didn't know he had done that, nor did I expect him to see the things I was trying to hide. But Michael wasn't finished. I started watching you more, Julia, he said, his voice low and heavy. I went to the farm a few more times. Every time I saw you laughing, as if your whole world revolved around that place. I tried to convince myself that you were just finding peace there. But then, I realized, you're no longer at peace when you're with me. I wanted to say something, but all words caught in my throat. I couldn't deny what he was saying. Because it was the truth. Michael bowed his head, his voice softer, as if he was talking to himself. I thought that, maybe, if I knew better, I could do something to bring you back. But the more I watched, the more I realized that, Julia, I've lost you. And that drives me crazy. Michael, I tried to speak, but he raised his hand to stop me. Don't, Julia. Don't lie to me. I don't blame you for seeking happiness, but you didn't share it with me. You pushed me away, and you didn't even realize it. Silence filled the room. I didn't know what to say, what to do. Michael had exposed everything I was trying to ignore, the truth that I had found happiness in a place without him. I want to ask you one thing, Michael said, his voice trembling. Julia, do you still love me? Or is it all just a habit that we've kept because we don't know what else to do? His question was like a direct blow to my soul. I didn't know how to answer, because I wasn't even sure myself anymore. I bowed my head, unable to look him in the eye. Michael, I don't know. I need time to think. Michael stood up, his eyes colder than ever. Then you think, Julia. But I'm not sure we can ever go back to the way we were. I sat alone in the familiar armchair in the living room, the dim yellow light casting a thin veil, just enough to hide my pale face in the shadows. Michael's words still echoed in my mind like bells reverberating in an empty space. "Julia, do you still love me? Or is it all just a habit that we've kept because we don't know what else to do?" His question was like a knife cutting deep into my soul, bringing out emotions I didn't want to face. I once thought I went to the farm to escape pressure, to find the freedom I had never had in my marriage. But now, I wasn't sure if that was still true. I loved Michael, didn't I? He was the man who had been with me for so many years. He was always gentle, always patient. But did I love him, or did I only love what he represented, stability, security, and a life I once thought I craved? I remembered the early days when we were together. Back then, Michael was the light, everything I needed to feel alive. He made me laugh, made me feel loved. But time had turned everything into a kind of obligation. The smiles became rare, the conversations became short, and gradually, we fell into an endless loop of silence and responsibility. I didn't know when we started to drift apart. Maybe it was when Michael started getting busy with work, or maybe it was when I realized I had given up too much of myself to live in his world. I once dreamed of becoming a writer, had big ideas, thought I would live an inspiring life. But then, I chose stability. I chose marriage. I chose Michael. And I thought that would be enough. But I was wrong. At the farm, I found something I had never dared to admit I was missing, a sense of freedom. Freedom wasn't just about riding horses or looking at the rolling hills, but it was the feeling of being myself, not bound by any expectations. There, I wasn't Michael's wife, not someone editing manuscripts for clients. I was just Julia, a vibrant woman, full of desires and dreams. I didn't know if Michael could understand this. How could I explain to him that he hadn't done anything wrong, but he also couldn't make me happy? How could I admit that I wasn't running away from him, but running away from myself, from the person I had become in this marriage? That night, I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Michael lay beside me, but we were as distant as strangers. I heard his even breathing, felt the warmth from his body, but it didn't make me feel safe as before. "I've lost you, Julia." His words from earlier kept repeating in my head. I didn't want to lose Michael. I didn't want to hurt him. But I also didn't want to continue living a life I felt I didn't belong to. Tears streamed down my cheeks, silently and uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to balance the love I once had for Michael and the freedom I had just found at the farm. I only knew that I couldn't continue living with this feeling anymore. The next morning, when Michael left the house, I drove to the farm as a habit. But this time, the feeling of relief didn't come. Olivia immediately noticed my unusual demeanor when I arrived. "Julia, what's wrong?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "Michael knows," I whispered, my voice choked. "Knows what?" "Knows that I've changed. Knows that I'm not the woman he married anymore," I replied, my eyes welling up. Olivia sighed, placing her hand on my shoulder. "Julia, you need to face this. You can't live forever between two worlds. Either you choose to go back to Michael and your marriage, or you choose to live the life you truly want." "But how do I know what's right?" I asked, almost pleading. "No one can answer that for you," Olivia said. "But be honest with yourself. That's where you have to start." Olivia's words were like a second knife stabbing into my mind. Be honest with myself? But what if that truth hurt Michael? What if it destroyed everything we had built over the years? I couldn't answer. And that scared me more than anything else. I spent the next week in a state of limbo, as if drifting between two precipices that I couldn't choose between. Michael didn't say much, but his gaze every time he looked at me was like a constant reminder. He knew, and he was waiting for an answer. Olivia, on the other hand, continued to urge me to be honest with myself. At the weekend, I decided to spend time at home, something I hadn't done in a long time. I wanted to force myself to face reality, not escape to the farm, not seek comfort in that free space. I cleaned the house, folded Michael's clothes, and looked at the wedding photos hanging on the wall. In the photos, I was smiling next to him, my eyes shining with the belief that this was the beginning of a happy life. But now, I couldn't find that person in the mirror. Where had she gone? That evening, Michael came home earlier than usual. He hung his coat on the rack, looking at me standing in the kitchen. The atmosphere between us was thick and heavy. "We need to talk," I began, my voice soft but firm. Michael nodded, walked to the dining table, and sat down opposite me. "I think so too." I took a deep breath, my hands clasped tightly together on the table. "Michael, I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything." He was silent, his eyes intently fixed on me, waiting. "I love you," I began, and I saw his shoulders relax slightly. "But I can't live like this anymore. I can't continue to be the wife you need, if it means I have to give up myself." "Julia, what are you saying?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse, as if he had guessed the answer but still didn't want to believe it. "I've changed," I continued. "The farm, Olivia, all of that isn't the cause. It's just how I found the part of myself that I lost in this marriage." "You want a divorce?" he asked, his eyes full of pain. I swallowed hard. I don't know if divorce is the answer. But I know that if we continue like this, we'll only hurt each other more. Michael slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "Julia, I've tried. I've done everything to build a good life for us. And you're saying you're not happy because you lost yourself? What about me? Do you think I haven't lost anything to make you happy?" His words were like a slap in my face. I knew he was right. But I also knew that this truth was bigger than both of our efforts. That evening, I left the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed space to think. I drove aimlessly until I realized I was standing in front of Willow Ridge Farm. Olivia had left in the afternoon, and the farm was silent under the moonlight. I walked slowly through the fence, touching the cold wooden bars. Midnight stood nearby, its eyes shining in the darkness. It tossed its head as if to say, "Are you okay?" "No, Midnight. I'm not okay," I whispered, feeling tears welling up. 3 days later, I returned home. Michael was sitting in the living room, dark circles under his eyes, clearly having not slept. He looked at me, but this time there was no anger or disappointment, only weariness. "Have you decided?" he asked. I nodded, feeling my heart clench. "Michael, I'm going to leave." His eyes flashed with pain, but he didn't say anything. I continued, "I need to find myself again, and I can't do that here. I love you, but that love isn't enough to fill what I'm missing." "Julia," he said, his voice hoarse. "I love you. But if this is what you need, I won't stop you." I nodded, tears falling down my cheeks. I knew that this decision would make many people judge me, that I was selfish, that I didn't appreciate what I had. But I also knew that if I continued to live like this, I would never truly exist. The day I moved out, Michael stood at the door, looking at me with eyes that were both loving and broken. "Julia, if you need me, I'll always be here." "Thank you," I said, my voice choked. "But I think I need to move on." I drove away, leaving everything behind. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something for myself. The car slowly rolled along the familiar streets, taking me away from the house I had called home for nearly a decade. In the rearview mirror, Michael's figure faded, but his gaze still haunted me, a mixture of love, disappointment, and acceptance. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that, for the first time in many years, I no longer felt like I had to please anyone. I had chosen freedom, but that freedom also came with an undeniable loneliness. I rented a small apartment in a town about a 2-hour drive from Seattle. The apartment had only one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking an empty field. It wasn't like the cozy house Michael and I had shared, but it had a simple, intimate feel that I found comfortable. In the first few days, I spent most of my time sitting on the balcony, watching the clouds drift slowly across the sky. There were no more silent dinners with Michael, no more hurried mornings with his scrutinizing gaze. But there was also no longer the sense of security he had provided. I started writing. The stories I had dreamed of writing in my youth gradually returned, words flowing like a flood across the page. Writing became where I poured out all my emotions, the pain, the joy, the fear, and the relief I found when I finally faced myself. One evening, I received a text message from Michael. "Julia, I hope you're okay. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. I'm still here." I read the message in the dim light of the room, feeling tears welling up. Michael was still Michael, always thoughtful, always willing to help. But I knew that replying to him, even just once, would trap both of us in an endless loop. I didn't reply. As time passed, I began to adapt to my new life. I got to know my neighbors, joined yoga and writing classes, and occasionally went to a small farm near the town to ride horses. I no longer saw Olivia. She was like a flame, lighting up a part of my life, but also making me realize that I needed to walk my own path, independent of anyone. But there were also long nights, when I lay on my simple bed, I missed Michael. I missed the way he laughed when telling a clumsy joke, the way he held me tight whenever I was sad. I wondered if I would ever find that feeling again with anyone else. A year later, on a drizzly afternoon, I received a package. Inside was a book, beautifully printed, with the author's name, Julia Carter. I had finished my first novel, a story about a woman finding herself in a world full of constraints and responsibilities. I held the book, feeling its weight, but at the same time feeling lighthearted. This was what I had chosen. This was the person I wanted to become. Michael didn't contact me again. I knew he had moved on, and that brought me relief. Once, while passing through Seattle on a business trip, I happened to see him walking with another woman. She was holding his hand, and they were laughing together. My heart twinged for a moment, but then I smiled. He deserved that, and so did I. I didn't know what the future held. I wasn't sure if I had chosen right or wrong. But for the first time in many years, I felt that I was truly living, not according to anyone else's expectations, but according to the way I wanted. And for me, that was enough.